Welcome back to another episode of Wine Wednesdays with Viking.TV. I'm really excited about today's guest. You may remember Laura from Gusbourne, Laura Rees, the Master Sommelier from Gusbourne, who was absolutely charming a few months ago. Well, this time we have Charlie Holland, who is the winemaker and general manager of Gusbourne, which is the greatest sparkling wine from England. And to many, including myself, I've actually done a hashtag at Better Than Champagne, which is why we're going to celebrate. Today's a very celebratory episode. We're going to talk about champagne, English sparkling wine, cava, Chalmat method sparkling wines, and maybe even point out how we make Broadbent Vino Verde, because that's got a little bit of spritz in it too, but it's not really technically a sparkling wine. But please welcome Charlie Holland. Charlie, hi.
Hi, Bartholomew. How are you?
I'm fantastic, and you? I'm especially excited because I'm about to have a glass of Gusbourne, when you allow me. Of course, I'm in America, so for me it is 10:20 in the morning. It's just past breakfast time, and I haven't had my first glass of champagne yet, so I'm a bit late. But you're past lunchtime, so I imagine you've been to the pub or something.
We haven't been to the pub, but yeah, no, 3 o'clock in the afternoon here. So high time for a drink of wine, I think.
Yeah. So how long have you been at Gusbourne, and how did you come about going to Gusbourne?
I've been at Gusbourne for about 9 years now, and as a head winemaker. But I've been involved in the Gusbourne wines for probably about 15 years now. I actually used to work at another producer where we used to make Gusbourne many moons ago before we built the winery there. So yeah, Gusbourne's been going since the first vines planted in 2004. And I guess I came on board really when we were starting to release some of those early vintages about 15 years ago.
15 years ago. Yeah, that's amazing. And England, why do you think England has suddenly become the rage, the thing, the prestige country for sparkling wine, where even the champagne producers are investing in wineries and land? Why is it England? What is it about England that's happened that they couldn't do in, say, maybe I shouldn't say, maybe California? You know, the Domaine Chandon of California, they never made it as good as the true champagne in France, Moet champagne in France. But England, it seems better quality to me anyway. But what do you think it is?
Well, we have the perfect growing conditions for making sparkling wine, and I think what that means is you have a very cool climate, because the essential part of sparkling wine and the wines we make is having this lovely acidity and a freshness to the wine. But what the conditions we have in England are quite unique in that you get a very long growing season. So we get over 100 days of growing season from when the vines flower to when you pick them. And what this allows you to do is develop quite ripe flavors that don't have much greenness in them. They're quite opulent in style, but you get this lovely backbone and structure running through the wine that comes from the acidity. So I think that's the key thing. And we also have a lot of the same geology. Some of our vineyards are on chalk, and It's the same geology, essentially the Paris Basin that covers all around Champagne and the northern part of Burgundy, also surfaces up where we are in southern England as well. So similar soils, similar growing conditions. And I guess what's really important in the days of climate change and global warming is we're becoming increasingly warm, but probably more importantly, some of these other wine regions are increasingly becoming too hot to grow grapes for sparkling wine. So they're not really able to harness this lovely freshness and vibrancy that you get from the acidity compared to years gone by. So I guess we have a very similar climate to the ones they had in Champagne maybe 50 years ago, or maybe in the 70s and 80s. And we're moving into that sweet spot, I guess, in terms of a perfect climate for sparkling wine.
And anyone who's been to England or looked at images of England, one of the most famous sites in England are the White Cliffs of Dover. And if you ever want to see what the chalk looks like, it sort of comes from Classe, from Champagne through the Paris Basin, as you say, and pops out there and then spreads across parts of southern England. But beyond the chalk soil, you have other soils as well, which the French don't have. Does that play in giving it more complexity?
Yeah, we have actually the sites I'm sitting at the winery and the vineyard today, and 2/3 of our vineyard are actually not on chalk. They're on sort of heavier soils, so clay over some sand underneath, and they give you a very different style of wine. I think generally the wines that come from the clay have a fullness and a roundness, a generosity, if you like, whereas the wines on the chalk are perhaps a bit more linear, a bit more poised, and a bit more elegant. And actually having the two is really exciting for winemaking, because you have this lovely backbone and freshness and elegance from the chalk, but then you fill in the frame, if you like, put flesh on the bones with the heavier soils. So it works very well for us.
And really, English sparkling wine is at its most famous in Kent, Sussex, and Hampshire, but they also make it in Norfolk and Cornwall and other places, I think. But those are the three main counties, and you have vineyards in 2 of those counties, and you're very close to the sea. Weren't you covered by ocean once?
We were. So yeah, 2/3 of our vineyard are in Kent, in the southeast corner of Kent, pretty much as far southeast as you can get before you're in the sea and you're over the Channel to France. And our other vineyards, 1/3 of them are over near Chichester in West Sussex. So 2 different geographies, 2 different, I guess, sites. The comparisons between them, I think, other than the soil type, they're very similar. So what's very important in England, quite low altitude. So both of them probably sit at around 45 meters above sea level. And that's important in a cool climate. I think in the rest of the world, when you go to Chile or California or South Africa, people are heading to the hills to try and get high altitude wines because they're trying to retain that freshness. We kind of have the opposite approach in England, is we want to get some more of that body and weight and maturity. So the lower down you are, the better. So low altitude's good. And we're probably on both sites only about 6 miles, 10 kilometers from the sea. And that's also important too. It gives you a nice maritime climate. So the temperatures never get really, really warm, and they never get really, really cold, and they have a sort of buffering capacity. And there's a sort of warming influence you get from these winds that come in off the sea. So enough wind to sort of keep the vines healthy and keep the disease levels down, but a warming breeze to help them to ripen too.
I suppose very important also to note that you do grow the same grape varieties as the Champagne producers. So what is it? Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Chardonnay.
Yes,
you've got all 3, don't you?
Yeah, the Holy Trinity, if you like. A lot of what we do, I think, in England is We do a lot of the stuff they do in Champagne. There's a natural tendency to follow 200 years of learnt wisdom, if you like, of how to make the best sparkling wines in the world. I think where it differs is we perhaps have a new world approach because we're very much a new territory. So we lean quite heavily on science and a slightly different approach. And I guess we look at the things they do in Champagne, and some of them we think, yes, absolutely, that makes complete sense. Other things we think, oh, well, we could probably do things a bit differently here. So we sort of challenge this convention, if you like, and think, how can we do that differently? And ultimately, how can we make wines that are English, so that we're not trying to copy, champagnes? It's important we have our own identity. And I think there is a very much a difference between champagnes and English wines. But back to your point, yes, we grow Meunier, Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay, and these three varieties work exceptionally well and have done for many years. The Chardonnay give the backbone, the structure to the wines. The Pinots give this lovely texture and weight and fruit to the wines. And Meunier is probably the variety that's talked about least of all, but very important in terms of that blend and how it works together. It really seems to knit the two together, and it acts as a sort of conduit from the wine from the front of the mouth to the back. Sometimes you have wines that have a bit of a hole in the middle, a donut, if you like, and the Meunier is a really important part of just filling out the palate.
I've never heard that before. That's fascinating. By the way, you mentioned, it's quite amusing, you mentioned that England is a new sort of sparkling wine producing country, but it's said that the sparkling wine was originally invented in England by the Romans. Do you believe in that?
Well, I mean, I don't know about the Romans, but it was a guy called Christopher Merritt who actually he submitted a paper to the Royal Society on this effervescent drink that was the toast of London. That was some years before Dom Perignon set foot in Haute-Villiers in Champagne, and there was a wine they used to make by a recipe, essentially adding a walnut of molasses into the bottom of a bottle, and there would be a re-fermentation, and it was this fizzy drink. And the other thing that English did, I think, that was really interesting is we were able to create glass bottles that could withstand the secondary pressure. Before that point, all the bottles that were made in France were from wood-fired furnaces, so the bottles were never as strong as they could be. But we had coal and coal-fired furnaces, so we were able to get to a much higher temperature to make the glass, and that's why we were able to make these second fermentations in bottles. So yes, I think if you look at the evolution of how it came about, very much an English invention. Annoyingly, I think the French, sort of, as they have done with lots of other things, took the idea and ran with it, and it's been a huge success. And Champagne is the biggest brand in the world, really. But I think the essence or the genesis of it came from England.
Yeah, I love that the French are now coming back to England and buying land and buying vineyards and building wineries. So that's, how many are there now? I know Tétinger's there, Pommery I think was there. Who else is there from France?
At the moment, it's I've been involved in English wine for many years now. There was always rumours of a champagne house swooping in to plant vines, but was always rumour. And then some years ago, both Tétinger and Pommery planted their own vines in southern England, and really, it was the ultimate endorsement that they're putting their money where their mouth is. So they really believe that it's worth planting vines here, and you can make exceptional wines. And I think that that's a great endorsement, and it gives a lot of confidence to the winemaking world that it really is exceptional ground that we're making wine from.
I have a theory about why they're doing it in England, and when they went to California to plant vines and make wines there. There was always a danger that California could become much bigger and potentially better than Champagne. And I think they wanted to protect the French champagnes, so they never made the American ones as good as the French ones. And whereas in England, the land is so expensive, and the volumes we'll ever be able to produce are so limited by cost of land and availability of land, that they can actually justify making English sparkling wine as good, if not better, than their own French champagnes, and not worry about it sort of destroying the image of French champagne. And I don't know if there's any truth in that. That's just my theory that I made up.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think, as I say, the guys from Champagne have come over, have been very friendly, supportive, really engaging, actually. And I think they recognise that they're two very different products, really. And, we should be celebrating both of them. I guess, in general, stylistically, Champagners are probably a bit fuller, a bit rounder, richer. But English wine, because of this acidity, and acidity is often a dirty word, but it's so important to flavour. It's what gives you that vibrancy, and that really makes one exciting to drink. The tingling on the tongue, so to speak. So they're very different products, and from our perspective, it's vive la différence. We enjoy both of them and celebrate them both.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, I'm having a sort of little celebration of my father's life, and we're doing 2 wines before dinner. We're doing Pol Roger and Gusbourne. My mother-in-law wanted my father's second wife wanted to have champagne, and I insisted, no, English sparkling wine is so much cooler. All the people in the wine business want to taste it and like drinking it, and Gusbourne is the top one, so we have to have that as well. And so we're having both. And luckily,
it'll be interesting how they shape up against each other.
Yeah. So let's talk about when I promised not to make this a 2-hour lecture, so we should move on. Let's talk briefly about the production methods of. There are 2 principal methods of making sparkling wine. I'll just touch on the Broadbent Vino Verde, which a lot of the viewers know and may be able to get on some of the ships. Broadbent Vino Verde is a little bit spritzy. It's not a sparkling wine, it's a little bit spritzy. And the way that we make that is we keep the wines in tanks, and just at the bottling, we add a little bit of CO2, which gives it a spritziness. Then there's the 2 principal sparkling wine methods are Charmat and what we call méthode champenoise or méthode traditionnelle. What do you call it in England?
Traditional method.
Traditional method, okay. Which is, why don't you explain the difference between the traditional method and the Charmat?
Yeah, of course. Well, traditional method, I think, is the oldest method of production, and the key thing, I think, is that there's a second fermentation that happens in the bottle. So what will happen is, we'll make a wine that is around 11% potential alcohol, and this wine is fermented to dryness. And what happens, obviously, during fermentation, the yeast turn the sugar into alcohol, but the byproduct is carbon dioxide, and often that gets escaped into the atmosphere to make a still wine, as most table wines you would try. But what we try to do with a traditional method is we will then bottle this wine into a bottle. We'll add a small amount of sugar, a small amount of yeast, and then we will essentially put a beer cap on top of the bottle to seal it. And what will happen is there will be a secondary fermentation where the yeast uses up all the residual sugar that's left there. And after that, the carbon dioxide that's given off is trapped within the wine. And usually you get about 6 bars of pressure. So probably about 2.5 times a car tire. And that is basically probably the most complicated method of getting fizz into your wine, but generally considered to be the top quality. And you get lovely tiny beads of thin bubbles that are developed, and a creaminess that comes from the bubbles compared to other methods. The image you can see on the screen at the moment is what happens next. So all of this yeast has consumed the sugar and turned it to alcohol and created this carbon dioxide. But then all of the yeast, unfortunately, has nothing to eat and dies and falls to the bottom of the bottle. And it forms a sediment which is known as lees. And lees is essentially the dead yeast hulls, which doesn't sound particularly romantic, but is actually hugely important for flavour development in wine. So when you think of a beautiful aged sparkling wine, they have these flavours that are yeasty, toasty, bready, biscuity, and all of that really comes from extended time in contact with these yeast hulls that line the bottom of the bottle. So we then have the problem, I think you've just seen on the screen, of how you get that out, that you essentially have to invert these bottles onto their neck and work all the sediment out into the neck, which is what these machines called riddling, as you've seen these ones here. These are pupetras used in the old days, and one person's job was to do 10,000 bottles a day, and awful RSI of just rotating these bottles, but gently moving them from horizontal to vertical. And then you have these machines which are more automated, that can do the same thing and save the poor man's wrists, do the same thing in about a week. Once they've been turned upside down, essentially you have to put them into a frozen ice bath that freezes the wine down to about -26 degrees, and it forms a little plug of ice by the neck of the bottle. And contained within this plug of ice is all the sediment that you've worked into the knot. And then that is clipped, and you fire. You take the cap off, and because there's so much pressure, it'll fire this plug of ice out like a bullet, containing all the yeast. And hey presto, your wine is now clear, and will have a little bit of sugar added to it, and a cork put in the top with a wire round, and it's good to go. But that process from start to finish probably takes, well, for us, it usually takes 3 or 4 years. So it's quite a laborious process, quite an involved process, quite an expensive process, but we think ends up with probably the best bubbles in your wine.
I'll just clarify one thing. You said you freeze the bottles, but you're just freezing the neck of a bottle to cover the yeast. You're not freezing the whole bottle. So that's why the plug is only in the neck.
Correct. Yeah, and then we have the other method, the tank method or Charmat method, and that essentially is a method you often find in things like Prosecco. Is a typical example of that. And in this instance, the wine goes through the same process, made in a tank, but that second fermentation will happen under pressure in a tank, and then the wine will go to bottle once it's already had its secondary fermentation process. And this means a couple of things. It means it's a lot easier and quicker to do, less involved in the process, but also ends up with quite a different product, in that you don't have all these lees and you don't have all these lovely toasty, yeasty flavors. Instead, you look for flavors that are probably a lot more primary, a lot more fruity, and quite often the Charmat methods also are made from varieties that are suited to that, have lovely peachy, fresh aromas. So 2 different styles of wine, both delicious, both suitable for celebratory occasions, but I guess bookends in terms of the style of wines you make.
Yeah, one of the guests who is very popular on this Wine Wednesday series was Markus Huber, who is from the Huber Winery in Austria, and he makes this lovely sparkling wine, Charmat method sparkling wine. And it's actually one of our biggest selling wines, because with the Charmat method, you can make them relatively inexpensively. So that one's, it's under probably it's around $15 or something like that. So not terribly expensive. And it's not just a celebratory wine, champagne. My parents, who were not huge drinkers, but they drank most of the day, they always started with champagne in the morning, simply because orange juice was so boring without champagne in it. But they always drank champagne for breakfast, and actually towards the latter years of their lives, they were switching to Gusbourne very often, because they became huge fans of Gusbourne too. So that's the Charmat method, and highly recommend the Charmat method and this Huber sparkling. This is a rosé actually, which is kind of fun. Then you didn't mention Cava. Now Cava We have an example here of a cava, which is a delicious wine. It's called Montsara. Again, this is inexpensive, but it is the traditional method. And how do they achieve that? How do they achieve a less expensive? And they do age that for 3 years as well. So I'm not sure how they do that.
I think it's one of the biggest shames. I think that a cava is not more expensive. Traditional method, some lovely wines, great value for money wines. I think different varieties, and I guess just more, over. Part of the problems we have, or part of the challenges you have in places, cool climate places like England, is we are on the margins of where you can achieve ripeness. I guess if you look at some of the best vineyard regions in the world, quite often they're the ones that are almost on the limit of where it's possible to grow. So you think of Burgundy, you think of Bordeaux, and the varieties they grow. It's almost difficult to get it right every year to get to the levels you need. But when you do get it right, the wines are sensational. As opposed to somewhere, I guess, where a slightly warmer climate is, you probably get more consistency of the wines. But for me, they're probably slightly less interesting because they're a bit hotter and warmer.
Yeah, when I think I find the difference, because I drink Gusbourne most of the time when I'm celebrating, or if it's a special weekend or something. I just want a really good sparkling wine. Gusbourne is what I go to. My wife, who likes to drink sparkling wine, she'd drink it every day if she could. And right now there's a shortage of Spy Valley Sauvignon Blanc, which is her daily tipple. So I've cut her off until it's back in stock, and she's drinking the Montsara Cava. And I find the difference between Montsara Cava and say Gusbourne is Montsara Cava, the quality is very good, it's delicious, but it doesn't have the complexity and the toastiness and the richness and the sheer quality of Gusbourne. But it is still a very nice sparkling wine that I'm happy to drink. It's just, I think what the occasion is, if I could drink Gusbourne every day, I would, but I can't. So let's move on to Gusbourne. Do you mind if I pour myself a glass? Because
of course, I should do the same.
Dying to have a little. I'm tasting the 2015 Blanc Noir, and by the way, I'm using your beautiful Gusbourne glasses, which are fantastic. Yeah, with simultaneous. It's like a mirror image. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers. Yes, this is our Blanc de Blanc, white of whites. So made exclusively from Chardonnay grapes. And of all the wines we make, actually, it's probably my favourite in terms of stylistic. I love Chardonnay when it's done well. I think what we try to do with this wine is really a sort of a Venn diagram of three things. One of them is this lovely citrus fruit and moving into sort of almost the orchard fruits, I guess, apples, pears, but has a lovely tingly citric spine to it. And then secondly, a lot of this toastiness we talked about before from the time it spends on the lees in the cellar to give it that lovely complexity. But the third thing that I think makes this really special, this wine, is it has this minerality, which is obviously a quite a difficult descriptor to define, really. People talk about minerals and you think, well, it's not exactly like you're going to lick a stone or chew on a piece of slate or anything, but there's something in this wine that I think when you try it, you can understand. There's a salinity. It's almost like an oyster shell sort of characteristic. Yes. And this is something that we highly prized. And there are certain vineyards we have, within our two sites, we have about 15 different vineyards and lots of different clones and examples of different types of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir and Meunier. And there's a couple of blocks that every year they seem to demonstrate demonstrate this. And everything is tasted blind when we do the blending. So we no vineyard lives on previous merit. It has to deliver every year. And there's a couple of sites that just really have this lovely, elegant saline oyster shell saltiness to them. And we're not really sure where it comes from, if I'm honest. We've looked into lots of areas. Is it high in, for instance, would be the obvious one, and it isn't. And we like to think this is kind of the terroir effect. So when a wine expresses of exactly where it's from, so the soils and what's unique about them, and this wine seems to really, really deliver on that year after year.
Yeah, no, it's spot on. Oyster shells is absolutely spot on. And to drink this with oysters, I cannot think of anything better to go with oysters. But it's also a food wine. Whereas Montserrat Cava is a simpler wine, and I wouldn't drink it with food. Whereas this, you can drink something like this throughout the meal. The quality is so high, and because of that acidity, I've actually in about 1982 I went to visit Veuve Clicquot in France, and I was there for 3 days being trained by my Canadian employers who I was about to move to Canada. And I think the French wanted to show me that that champagne can go with meals. So we ate in 2- and 3-star Michelin restaurants every lunch and dinner for 3 days. It was quite spectacularly fascinating and enjoyable and rich. But Gusbourne could go throughout a meal very easily, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And the natural thing, oysters, it's designed to go with those. It's a perfect match. But other seafood, scallops, fish, it's actually really good. One of my favourite matchings is with a classic English dish, so fish and chips. It goes really well because you've got that lovely acidity seems to cut through the oiliness of the batter and the fish. And it seems to perhaps not the most gastronomic match, but works really, really well. So quite versatile.
No, that's really interesting. I'm a huge fan of fish and chips, and I have cravings for them. And actually, in New York, I was in New York about 6 weeks ago, and I had the best fish and chips in my life. And I should have had Gusbourne with it. It didn't occur to me. It was such good. I mean, it was a $45 dish of fish and chips. It was a very fancy restaurant. They did it really well. But yeah, I completely agree. That would be a brilliant pairing. Whilst we've been talking, we've been showing slides of the vineyards and the production, and talk us through about some of the other wines where you have, in America, we have some of your table wines actually, but we principally concentrate on the Brut Reserve, the Blanc de Blanc, the Rosé, and more recently a Blanc Noir. And I think we have pictures of all of those, and maybe you can talk us through some of them as well.
Yeah, of course. So our Brut Reserve, I guess, is our play on a classic cuvee, if you like. So a blend of all these 3 varieties. The splits of the percentages of how much will change in any given year. But really what we're trying to make is a wine that I guess from an English point of view is rounder, fuller. We like to think of it as a bit of a hug. It has a very reassuring feel to it. So whereas I think the Blanc de Blanc is very elegant and direct because of this acidity and the freshness. I think the addition of the Pinot Noir and the Meunier into that blend gives a more fuller, rounder, richer style of wine. So it's a nice sort of counterpoint. Yeah, it's a lovely balanced wine, and it shows off why in Champagne, and they've been doing those 3 varieties in tandem for so long, because they really seem to work together. And then we have our rosé, which is again a blend of all 3 varieties, and those varieties will change. The difference is obviously the colour, and there's a couple of different ways of making your wine pink. Essentially you're of all those three varieties, the flesh and the juice is white. The only bit of colour you've got is from Pinot Noir and Meunier, which has a red skin. And really, the longer period of time that the juice is in contact with the skins, the darker that colour will be. So there's two ways of doing this. Firstly, you can essentially leave the juice in contact with the skins for a certain period of time until you've got a lovely sort of pink colour. Or what they classically do in Champagne is you make a white wine and then you make a red wine and then you blend a tiny little bit of the red wine into the white wine to make a pink wine. And they both have, I guess, benefits. When you make the first method, the skin contact method, you generally get wines that are fuller and richer and have a real authentic rosé flavour to them, but quite difficult to get right, especially in cooler years when there's a bit of greenness to the grapes. Equally, when you add a bit of red wine, you can really keep the integrity of the wine, so it feels very much like a sparkling wine, and it's a tiny addition of maybe 4%, 5% of red wine, just to give you a bit of colour, but you get the elegance and poise of a standard sparkling wine. So two different methods, two benefits. We like both, so we use both, is the short answer. So we do a certain amount of skin contact, especially in a warmer year, to get that real rosé flavour in there. And then we do a small amount of this red wine addition just to get the colour absolutely perfect. And it's amazing what 4 or 5% addition of a red wine can do to the wine. All of a sudden, it moves into a whole different spectrum of fruit. So much more about strawberries, raspberries, cherries, all the things you'd associate with rosé wines. So a tiny little difference, but actually a remarkable impact on the flavour. And then the final wine we have is our Blanc Noir. So as the name suggests, white from black. And this is made just from the red grapes, and in this case, just from Pinot Noir. And I guess if we had the reason we created this wine is to be the yang to the Blanc de Blanc's yin. So it's really the polar opposite. So whereas the Blanc de Blanc is elegant and poised and direct, this one, as the colour suggests in this image, is a bit darker and a bit more brooding, and there's an undertow there, which is a bit more serious and a bit more complex, as you often get with Pinot Noir based wines. So yes, there's some of that red fruit, but there's also some of those bramble dark fruits. But there's something underneath that, a bit of drive and energy, which is a bit darker, and I think it just highlights the real benefit of those two different styles of wines.
Let's just go back to the picture we just saw, which was a bottle of Blanc Noir with the most extraordinary wine glasses. I mean, they sort of follow the shape of your wine coolers, which I have one actually here. So it must be some sort of shape that has some relevance to you. And who designed them? Why that shape?
I'm not entirely sure who designed those ones actually, but the for instance, the glass I'm holding as well is a standard wine glass, and that's important actually. And I tend to drink all of our wines out of a standard wine glass, and as the picture showed with the beautiful glasses on the table there, it's really important to have to fully enjoy the wines, in my view, is to give them a bit of aeration. And I almost drink them like you would do a still wine. Yes, you do lose some of the sparkle there, but sometimes the problem with drinking from a wine flute is, especially when you have a nose as big as mine, it's difficult to get it all the way into the glass and to really capture all those beautiful aromas. So really you want something that's a bit tuliped, so wide here, but tulip towards the end to capture all of the flavour, because these wines are hugely expressive, and especially have them slightly warmer. So have them at a bigger, a higher temperature, and the more it warms up, again, the less it seems more like a sparkling wine, but it will give off a lot more in terms of flavour. So yeah, I think it's important to they're both good. Flutes really show off the wine in all their glory and all the beautiful bubbles and the foam they create. But actually, to really get the best out of a top quality sparkling wine, I drink it out of a wine glass.
Yeah, and I think that's generally the wine trade has gone that way as well. Although I do use your beautiful Gusbourne designed glasses, which are fantastic.
Yeah,
but
they're halfway house. They're somewhere in between, I think. So you've got they're slender, but they're also tulipped and enough to capture.
Yeah, and it accommodates the big noses, which you and I are both afflicted with. Probably me more so than you. But my wife, I try and get her to drink out of these glasses, but she insists on the flute, which I don't know. She just says to her, it's more what she likes drinking sparkling wine out of. At least she's not using the old Marie Antoinette cup, the little sort of coupe that was molded on a part of her body to form. But yeah, so this is the glass for me, a regular wine glass as well. Where are we? We've covered the wines, and you make some table wines too. We've had a little bit of your Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And actually the Pinot Noir is excellent. I did it in a blind tasting with a couple of master sommeliers, including Laura, who I used a vintage of your Pinot Noir, which she had not ever tasted. I was lucky to get one which she hadn't had. And we did this blind tasting, and the guesses were all over the place, from New Zealand to Oregon to Germany and no one guessed that it was English. But the quality was there that it fooled people into thinking it's from one of the traditionally great Pinot Noir producing regions. And they did, of course, pick Burgundy as well. So Burgundy, New Zealand, Oregon, and Germany, all of them came up in the guessing game, but none picked England.
No, it's something I think is fascinating. 90% of what we do is sparkling wine, and then in our country you can do every year to a very high standard, excellent wine. But in certain years you can also make some great still wines, and we grow Chardonnay and Pinot. We have these Burgundian clones that are essentially from Dijon that are some of the best red wines in the world are made from. We have some heavier soils here, so that kind of works as well. And in certain years, so 2020, 2018, 2016, there's a pattern there I'm seeing emerging, but they are all, we were able to make wines 12, 13 degrees natural alcohol. So you're already getting up to where you need to get to without having to worry. And there's no reason why we can't make exceptional wines in this country. It's the new, I do think the next frontier will be English still wines, especially if global warming continues, temperatures continue to rise. We'll see more and more of that.
Yeah, I mean, from the sparkling wine point of view, there's been a couple of very sort of highly publicized tastings. One a few years ago was in Paris with a bunch of French sommeliers, and it was a blind tasting of English sparkling wines against French Grand Marque champagnes, and it was blind, completely blind. And in every single category, every pairing, they thought they picked out the English as the one they thought was the highest quality, and then it was revealed that they thought it was a French one they were choosing, but when it was revealed, it was the English one they'd picked as the higher quality wine. And in each pairing, I think you used in Gusbourne, I think you used the Blanc Noir against something that tasting, but it was fascinating.
It's fascinating, and I think that comes, ultimately, I think we've probably moved a certain way, as I mentioned at the beginning now, of English wine just being admired for being English wine as opposed to almost as good as champagne. But yes, clearly in the early days there was a lot of comparison, and the easiest way to convince people that the quality's there is to do blind tasting competitions. And generally we'd find, especially if you have something like Gusbourne up against a Grand Marque, a producer who's making millions of bottles of Veuve Clicquot type product, the English wine will stand out because it's more interesting, it's got more character, it's fresher, it's more vibrant, and that's, you only get that for some people if you put liquor on lips, as they say. So it is important to do that, but I think we are I think it would now recognise within the trade that English wine. I still remember, 15 years ago, convincing English people that sparkling wine was a thing. It's undoubtedly a thing now, and it's not very often you get a new wine region appear on the world map. Probably the last one was really New Zealand in the sort of 80s and 90s. That could really produce exceptional wine, really exciting new wines, and I think English wine is the next one. So it's exciting now, but in 10 years' time, I think even more so it'll be the ones to watch.
Yeah. Now, the really good news for the guests on Viking ships. Certainly, some of the sea ships, ocean cruises, you can actually have Gusbourne on board because they used Gusbourne when they did a launch of a new ship and they were sailed around England. They got Gusbourne to launch that ship and on the maiden voyage they used Gusbourne, and now I believe Gusbourne is on. I don't know if they're on all of the ocean cruises, but they're certainly on some of them. I don't think they're on the river ships yet, but that's in work in progress, in due course maybe. But the other good thing is that people can visit you, and we saw some lovely pictures a few minutes ago of people sitting around a table, and that was a seminar or someone leading a tasting. Who's the guy leading the tasting?
That's Dan, who runs our cellar door. Yeah. So this is in the nest there, which is our cellar door operations, and we opened our nest in 2017. It was really the opportunity to open ourselves up to the general public, to welcome people to come and try the wines, walk around the vineyards, see how we make the wines. It was really important, and it's a great offering. So if anyone is England, I think we're less than 40 minutes on the high-speed train out of King's Cross. So within an hour, door to door, from central London. So if anyone is in London and they want some, fresh air and some sparkling wine in the countryside, very easy to get to.
Also, you're very close, like 15-minute drive from one of the most spectacularly old, beautiful villages in England called Rye, which is in Sussex, I believe. Very close to you, right?
Yes, we're on the sort of Sussex-Kent border. We're in Kent. Rye's just over the border, but town sort of with huge importance, military importance, and shipbuilding importance in times gone by. I mean, the history around here is amazing to see. And Appledore itself, which is a little tiny sleepy village we're based just outside of now, used to apparently at one point in time being an extremely important boat building capital. And of course, we're about 6 miles away from the sea, but hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we were actually probably less than a mile away from the sea where we are now. And some of our vineyards actually, there's a pilgrimage route that goes through our vineyards called the Saxon Shore Way that, as the name suggests, dates back to Saxon times. And it used to be a coastal route that people used to walk along. And that sort of dissects our vineyards. Of course, now we're 6 miles away from the sea, but fascinating to know that at one point half of our vineyards were on the seashore and the other half were probably under the water.
Lots of shelling in your vineyards, probably.
Yeah.
So Dan is great. I've only met him once or twice, but we communicate by email. Whenever an American visitor comes to the winery, they send me an email saying, can you let them know where to find Gusbourne? And probably before they've even left the winery, I've replied and sent an email to the person. And so certainly when they're home that evening, they get an email from me saying, let me know where you live and I'll tell you where you can buy the Gusbourne. In England, they can buy it direct from a winery. You ship it, right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. We sell it direct from the website. Obviously in lots of places in America too. Yeah,
you can order the Gusbourne online from a number of online retailers. You can also buy them in some of the finest wine shops. Before COVID, actually, when we launched it, it was 95% in restaurants, but we've slightly adjusted that because COVID shut all the restaurants down, and now we have a lot more fine wine retailers who are selling it for us. I think, what else do we have? We've got some final slides maybe to show you a picture of like this couple sort of sitting overlooking the vineyard, and it's very contemplative and romantic. So this is somewhere where
yes, so
can go have a glass.
Absolutely. So the wine you tried, the Blanc de Blanc, the field they stood in, Boot Hill. That's where they are. So you can have a glass of wine, this lovely saline oyster shell wine, looking out over this beautiful vineyard, and in the distance, as you can see in that photo there, is the sea, and not very far away. So there's some beautiful vistas. It's, Kent's known as the Garden of England. It's part of the most beautiful part of England, I think. Surrounded by orchards and renowned for growing best fruit and veg in the country. But really, it is lovely rolling hills and countryside.
Have a spread of food like that, do they presumably need to make an appointment and book in advance so you can prepare that, I'm sure?
Yeah, we do lots of different tours, and really anything from a self-guided tour of showing yourself around to these sort of sharing platters and picnics, all the way up to sort of Michelin star pop-ups. We have restaurant chefs from some of the best establishments in the country coming to create food, and foraging food from the vineyard, and amazing things they can do as well. So all manner of different experiences and things to do here.
I didn't know that about the Michelin star chefs coming to your place. Well, yeah. Listen, Charlie, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fascinating. I've learned some things. I'm sure everyone has learned a lot today, and I want to just wish you the very best, and hopefully one day you'll get on a cruise and drink your own wine on a cruise, but you can rest assured that a lot of Viking guests will be enjoying Gusbourne in their staterooms or in the restaurants on the ships. And we love the partnership with Gusbourne, and thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to speak to you and to all of the Viking team. So thank you very much, and cheers.
Yeah, and the Viking team, by the way, is brilliant. They produce these shows on Viking.TV. Every day there's a show of some sort. We do Wine Wednesdays. We've done a couple of series, and then the occasional pop-up one like this. But their Viking.TV is phenomenally interesting and varied, and it's good. Anyway, thank you, Charlie. See you soon.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.